Hello, good morning, well, good afternoon, USA, and good evening, Europe. Oliver Gardner reporting for the Organic Consumers Association and Regeneration International. And we are here at the Caux Dialogue on Land Security with Judith Schwartz of Regeneration International, also known for her book Water in Plain Sight, and John D. Liu, the well-renowned filmmaker for his film Green Gold. Hi there.
Hi.
So the Caux Dialogue on Land Security is an event that happens once a year that gathers pioneers in regenerative development to address human security and land health. And so, John, you've been coming here for 6 years.
Well, I haven't come every year, but I did come to the first one, and I think this is the fourth time I've been here, actually.
Yeah. And so you, Judy, you've been writing a lot. You've also been following John's works for quite a while now. And so the idea of getting all three of us here together was basically to get you guys talking together and talk about what we've been looking at in this conference. And both of you have been presenting at this conference too. So what have you been presenting, both of you? So, yeah.
You're asking me to think back to yesterday.
Yeah.
What I was presenting about was really a look at restoration and how it does offer many solutions, but we don't see those solutions because of the way that we think about our challenges around the world. And when we really open up what these challenges are, be they climate change, water insecurity and lack of water, and floods, droughts, all these different things, we see that we can address them by focusing on the land.
Yeah, and so you've been looking at peace and discussing with you earlier on, Judith. I think you have a few questions for John.
Yeah, so if you walk through this great hall here and take a right, there's a very interesting sign, and it says that peace is the biggest opportunity, the biggest business opportunity in the world today. And that's quite a provocative statement because it's certainly not the way that we usually think about things. And so I would love to hear you expand upon that notion.
Well, I think what we're really saying is that holistically we have to deal with everything together. It's not just the land, and it's not just peace. I mean, we have human activities, and we have the ecological systems, which are the support systems for life. And what we see now is that in the places where the landscapes are massively degraded, that's also the place where there are wars. And we are especially focusing on some very fragile areas, and we're looking at the potential of restoring a kind of a very special place at the center of the Middle East, which, if it's possible to do this, it changes the paradigm. So throughout my life, I'm 64 years old, and in my entire life, the region in the Middle East has been such a difficult place, and there's been so much violence. And I remember being 13, 14 years old and unable to go through the Suez Canal because the war was going on. And what we have to see is that all these various attempts at peacemaking have sort of just talked about it, really. And, you know, the more weapons that pour into the area, the more talk there is about the need, it doesn't mean that anything is actually happening. And while this has been going on, the landscape has been further deteriorating. The soil fertility, the water cycle, the biodiversity has been being lost. And recently there's been a very long drought in the region. And it's not really surprising that there are these military conflicts coming up, because they're coming after these serious drought and difficulty. People leave their farms because they can no longer survive. They move into the cities, and in the cities they have basically nothing to do.
Which is what happened in Syria. And Syria suffered a drought from 2006 to 2011 that pushed 1.5 million people, agrarian populations essentially, from the countrysides into the cities.
And we can look beneath what we call the drought, and beneath that scenario was land degradation, which meant that any rain that did fall could not soak into the ground and be useful to the farmers.
And we're at a position today where the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification are coming up with these figures saying that 135 million people are threatened by forced displacement, unsafe migration in arid zones.
Yeah, and I think what we're looking at now is that some of the work that I've been doing over the last 20-some years shows that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. It's unnecessary to just accept the degradation. And if you accept the degradation, you're really kind of accepting the consequences of that too. And what we see now is a growing consensus that we have to have an intention to actually restore the earth. And now, this is a very specific place with tens of millions of people who are displaced and a lot of problems. So it's quite difficult to get your mind around the idea that we could go in there and try to do something. But I think when we open our hearts to the question, we have to say this is exactly where we have to work. Because, you know, if we try to do something here in Switzerland or in, you know, Europe or something, it's much easier. But here is where the real need is. And I think we actually have to work all over the world in the entire earth, but we must not forget these places. And so we have a plan now. It's been studied for almost 2 years, and a lot of experts have looked at this. We think we can kickstart a regeneration. And this regeneration will give meaning to people's lives, will give meaningful work to large numbers of people who are now just, well, you know, they have nothing to do. So they're prey, in a way. They're frustrated, they're humiliated. And so they're quite susceptible to being caught up in the violence in the region. But if they're engaged in restoration, in regeneration, then they have no need for that. They would much rather care for their families, make sure that their children and future generations will inhabit a beautiful place, than to be caught up in this violence, which really is pointless in a way.
Well, you make a really important point, because often when we watch the news and read the newspapers, we get the sense that the cause of many of these conflicts are all geopolitical, tribal, this group against that group. And one thing that I've learned here is how the state of the land, and specifically land deterioration, is underlying so many conflicts. One area where we learned about that yesterday was the Sudan, that one of the major pressures was the deterioration of the land and the seizing of land from different populations at different times that left people really with no livelihoods.
I think it's basically everywhere. So whether you're talking about Somalia or Sudan or Syria, but I mean you can also look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. You can go to the sub-Saharan Sahel, and you find places. You can go to East Africa and see massive droughts, megafauna dying in Kenya, habitat loss for these wonderful places. So we really need to understand that these Earth systems are affected by human actions. And so this is the Anthropocene. And so in the Anthropocene, we have to realize that we either are going to have a terrible negative impact, or we could actually make the intention to restore all these places. Technically, we can do that. It's a better use of our capital and our energy than continuing to just like pump out more mass production and consumption. So we need to realize this is kind of a responsibility. It's not just a potentiality, it's a necessity.
And so here today, gathered, were experts from all over the world, experts in land restoration, also experts in national security, immigration, all looking at these problems and brainstorming together what actually can be done.
Also finance. I think it's an interesting thing that we're coming to the realization that whatever we're going to do, we're going to have to direct capital at this. So if we're unable to direct capital to do restoration, why? What's going on? Who's running the financial system? What are they thinking? If it's not in the interest of humanity, if fossil fuels, which we know actually are changing the climate, or weapons, which are destabilizing fragile regions like the Middle East, these are not real investments. If you think about it, this is a determination that there will be a horrible outcome here. We need to make sure that the intention for humanity is that there be a good outcome. And it's not enough to say it's just not possible. Of course it's possible. We can do this. We can restore the earth. And so we have to know that. We have to believe that. We have to act on that. And that's, we have a limited amount of energy in our lives, our life's energy. The Chinese word is qi. So we have a limited amount of qi, and we need to use this. We need to direct it. And the place where it needs to go is where we need to direct our energy. It's an acupuncture point on the earth, an acupuncture point in human civilization. And this is a turning point in human history, and we have to take this opportunity.
So, Judy, you wrote a book called Water in Plain Sight. Water in Plain Sight. Are there solutions that are in plain sight? We know that there are. We know that there are. And we have been discussing solutions today. So there still is hope, isn't there?
Absolutely. And one interesting point is talking about investing in peace, is that shifts the paradigm. Often when there are war-torn places and one is working towards peace, when we think of that as almost charity or diplomacy, give money to these poor people. But by talking about it being a business investment and being good for all of us, including our economic systems, rethinking our economy so that we are able to embrace these opportunities, then I think that's a different way of looking at what peace means and what peace can bring.
Definitely. And so we living in a consumerist system that has based itself on infinite growth. But we have infinite growth. I mean, look at these mountains behind, And this is what we need to base our consumerism on. We need to base our consumerism on the infinite growth of
I wouldn't put it quite that way.
Okay, go ahead.
I wouldn't say that we need to continue to consider ourselves as consumers. We're human beings. We need to reduce our consumption. That's the fact. But we have 7.5 billion people. We're adding 1 billion people every 12 years to promote consumerism. I don't think is the way forward. We do consume things. We just need to do that in moderation and sustainably. But what we really need to do is realize that our intention mustn't be consumption. Our intention must be function. Because when the systems, the ecosystems are functional, they're infinite. They're eternal. This is paradise. We live on the earth. We have an oxygenated atmosphere, a fresh water systems, fertile soils. And unless we destroy them, so why destroy them? Let's maintain them. Let's restore them when they're degraded. And we know how to do that. And so, that must be our intention. And to also realize we're just passing through. We're here for a few more years, maybe a few more decades if we're lucky. But the next generation is coming, and the quality of their life, their experience of the earth is going to be determined by what we understand and what we do. And these places in the Middle East, what we see is thousands of years of mistakes, thousands of years of choosing to believe that products that we extract from the systems are more valuable than the systems themselves. The systems are much more valuable. They're infinite, they're eternal, and they're vastly more valuable than anything that human beings will ever produce. So we have to stop thinking about things and start thinking about life. And, we're going to leave this life and go to another dimension, but we have some time while we're here. We have our life's energy, and our life's energy needs to go in this direction to ensure peace, to go to these places and decide we're going to deal with the hardest problems on the earth. And
for those of us that are focused on life, that are focused on peace, that are focused on good intentions, we're the Organic Consumers Association, so we are also focused on responsible consumption,
yes.
Which in responsible consumption means not over-consuming and consuming products that have a positive impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Judy, what do you think? You've done a lot of research across lots of different sectors. And I saw you've been taking a lot of notes here today. What really makes you hopeful at the moment?
What makes me hopeful is, first of all, as John says, seeing and knowing that it is possible to restore our degraded and degrading ecosystems. And what makes me hopeful here in particular is seeing that people all over the world are engaged in this process and working to make it possible for restoration to happen on a larger scale. And when you're working in this vein, knowing how much company you have, because it can be very difficult to believe that what you're doing is going to make a difference. Anyway, that makes the difference, knowing that there is support and that there are increasingly creative ways of allowing vehicles that make it move forward. But in terms of cost, yes, it costs something, but it's really, really inexpensive to do because those ecosystems that have degraded, they are waiting to be restored. Nature wants to heal itself. So it doesn't necessarily mean much, and it could start with repairing the water cycle. It could start with working on the carbon cycle and working to bring carbon back into the ground, and that in turn supports the water cycle. So there are so many different ways in, and
restoring human health as well.
And that is absolutely part of the picture, because the food we eat can only be as healthy as the soil upon which it is grown.
And I think we have to understand that when we do this, we're creating positive feedback loops that are just accumulative. So if we stay in the disaccumulative situation that we're in, like in the Middle East and some of these massively degraded areas, then the outcomes are predetermined. We know what the outcomes will be. But if we start to restore them, then they just consistently get better as they accumulate organic material, as the biomass grows and as the biodiversity, speciates and differentiates. So, we know how to do this now. And I would also say one really interesting thing about Caux. This is the place where the Germans and the French were convened right after the Second World War, and they created the Iron and Steel Pact, which became the Treaty of Rome, which became the European Union. So a few people in a room, this room, created the mechanisms which made peace in Europe after the Second World War. So this room has historical significance, and people coming here to talk about this And having done that for the last 6 years here is a very interesting thing. We're on the edge of something really, really important.
So you've been coming here for quite a while. What kind of people come here, and who can come here?
Well, basically everybody can come here. This is a place where they convene. The North Koreans have been here. After the Arab Spring, many people who participated in that came here. Young people come here to talk about leadership, to talk about what they want in their future. Caux and the Caux forums are famous in certain circles. I would say there is, the kind of a specialized thought. So people who are thinking about the future, who are thinking about peace, who are thinking about meditation. I mean, every morning they meditate here. They ask us to work in the kitchen and to clean the rooms and this kind of thing. So,
and here we find government ministers, we find high officials from the UN, high officials from NATO. They might be serving you breakfast in the morning. They might be washing plates with a smallhold farmer from Chad. I mean, this is a really interesting event. Yeah. So it's the Caux Dialogues on land and security that happen once a year here in Caux, Switzerland. Yeah. There we are. So I think we're ready to wrap up now. So thank you very much for your time, John D. Liu and Judith Schwartz. And thank you for watching. If you want more information on organic food or organic farming, you can text BYTES, B-Y-T-E-S, at 97779, or you can also sign up to the Organic Consumers newsletter at organicconsumers.org, or follow us on Twitter at Organic Consumers. Thank you, and we shall leave you with a lovely view of lake and sea. Voila. Bye, folks.